Berserk 1997 has the interesting distinction of being considered by many, and with good reason, to be the greatest anime ever made. Also, a lot of people consider it to be the most infamous, with the worst cliffhanger ending ever put into an anime, which, once again, I think also has a lot of legitimacy to it. For my part, I've referred to this series a couple times in the past. I put it down as one of my favorite anime series of all time. I also listed it as one of the best anime series for non anime watchers, or people who are just looking to get into anime. I think anybody who likes dark fantasy, or action, or military fiction, or even just interesting character development would really get a lot out of this show, and you don't really need any understanding of anime tropes before you really kind of dive in. That being said, as a general disclaimer, other than the fact that we're going to talk about spoilers, but this thing is like 20 years old at this point, so I don't think that's really a big issue. Berserk is one of the most horrific pieces of violence ever inked. There is blood, there is gore, there is rape, there is demons, there's all kinds of just insane stuff going on. And if you have a low or even moderate tolerance for a lot of that, I would recommend you probably should skip this or watch an episode or two. And if it's just too much, then yeah, I'd probably go away. I would say, though, I do not feel that the violence and gore and rape and stuff in Berserk is fetishistic or nihilistic. I think Berserk has a very strong sense of humanity going through its core. And all of this stuff, even if it can sometimes get so over the top, it's almost kind of comedic, is very much taken seriously. It is presented as a tragic struggle that humanity has to go through to endure this suffering and try to come out of it in one piece. Not so much that it's like sexy or hot. Even some of the scenes that look like they should be fan service are more fan disservice than anything else, and are played up as being disturbing rather than being sexy. So, like I said, Berserk 1997, off the bat, I just really recommend it. Now, I've watched this show 3 times. The first time I watched it by myself without knowing anything about it, and I thought it was okay. I didn't really get it that much. I was pretty young at the time. I just thought it was kind of a pretty good run of the mill dark fantasy series. The second time I watched it with some friends who were big Berserk fans. And as I was going through, they were pointing stuff out to me, they were explaining things, and I enjoyed it a lot more. It went from being like a 7 out of 10 to like a 9 out of 10. And rewatching it again for a third time recently, I found I enjoyed it a lot more. I might actually give this show a 10 out of 10. It's really damn good. They did pretty much the best job they ever could do with a adaptation, although there's a couple little details I wish they'd put in, but I get why they didn't include them. This is a show that I think more than just about anything else I've ever seen really does benefit from repeat watchings. Either if you know more about the overall plot of the story, or you just know how it's going to end, because you can go back and see all the little things that were put in to choreograph or telegraph things that were going to happen later, the foreshadowing, the little character bits that were in there and eventually did pay off. So I do think that this is a show that is benefits a lot from rewatches, perhaps multiple rewatches, especially if you're going to go through the manga. I'm gradually making my way through the manga. There's a good series that's like 24 hours long where the guy goes through basically every frame of Berserk and analyzes it and talks about the background of it. So I'm going through that, but like I said, every time I watch this show, I'm finding new stuff and I'm enjoying it a lot more. I am actually happy that, ironically enough, now that Miura's dead and his assistant's taken over, we're probably going to actually get the series finished in a timely fashion since he seems to have a much more regular work schedule. And from what people tell me who are more long-term fans, the later chapters are similar in quality or just as good as what Miura was producing, because the guy knows exactly what's going to happen and it's the team who's been helping him to make things for years. So that being said, let's get into Berserk 1997. Now, I think the big challenge with adapting Berserk, particularly this part of it, is Do you want to make the Golden Age arc a self contained story, or do you want to present it more in the context of the wider Berserk universe? Because I feel like you have to make certain stylistic decisions, like what you include, what you don't include. If you're making it as a standalone story, I think you can cut out some of the references to or foreshadowing of stuff that's going to happen later. I also think you can try to limit the amount of supernatural stuff that happens prior to the end of the show. I kind of feel like one of the things you should try to do when you're adapting this, and if you're showing this to someone for the first time, is as much as possible not tell people what's going to happen and have it just kind of come as a surprise. I mean, there's a lot of telegraphing that happens in terms of Griffith's behavior, prophecies, foreshadowing, but I feel like sometimes it leans a little too strongly into some of the fantasy elements and gives some stuff away a little bit too early. And once again, that is good if we're looking at this as an arc within the wider Berserk story, but it does, I think, hurt it a bit as being self contained. My biggest single criticism with this show, and this is actually my same criticism with the manga, is that it doesn't open with the Golden Age arc. It opens with part of the Black Swordsman arc. And my kind of issue with that is I think it kind of is a spoiler and it limits the impact of some things that happen during the Golden Age arc. Because like a big part of the Golden Age arc is there's not really fantastical arguments elements at the beginning, and they kind of start to seep in and get more and more so. And in the first episode of the Berserk anime, we get revealed that Griffith is the big bad. We get that there's demons. We have Guts with the cannon arm and the eye patch and stuff like that. And it does kind of spoil exactly like a lot of what's going to happen. And I do think it limits some of the impact of like Griffith becoming the main villain of when the supernatural elements really more start to make their way into it. So, and from my understanding, Miura himself had this issue because when he started Berserk, he wasn't really sure where it's going. And there's different theories as to how you should read Berserk. Some people think you should just start with the Golden Age arc, and it would almost make more sense to start with that, then read the first part of the Black Swordsman arc, and then read the part after the Golden Age arc. That's probably what I would recommend, but your mileage may vary. So, getting into the show itself, we have the first episode, which is a flash forward to the Black Swordsman arc, which we can talk about a bit later, but let's get into the show. So, Berserk is at its core, I think, a very good example of something that I've said many times is I think Western storytelling has better plot but worse characters, whereas Japanese storytelling has better characters but worse plot. Japanese stuff is very good at character development, having character arcs, putting in little details, little moments, writing characters that seem like well rounded, flawed people. At the same time, though, the plot structure is often very much in service of the characters' kind of internal matters. And there's a reason why, if you think about it, so many animes just have really weird endings. Like it turns into some weird existential mindfuck. And to a much larger extent than Western stuff does, and the story can kind of be uneven, and the pacing can kind of be weird, and there's just random game changers thrown in. And at its core, Berserk is very much, I think, about Guts, Griffith, Casca, and the various characters within, and that's what really drives it. Is as you go through it, you see dramatic changes in them, and it feels very organic. Another thing that it does, I think, very well, and this is especially when we get into the rest of the manga, is how it treats its villains. While some of its villains are just 100% evil, sadistic nutjobs, in a lot of cases, something it does very well is it explains and gives context to why the villains are the way they are without excusing any of their actions. Like, you get to the Count, and he is a complete and total psychopath. He's really evil. But if you look at his backstory and you look at how he was like a religious man, and then his wife became a thought who partook in orgies, and that's what led him to his despair. And ultimately, he wasn't able to sacrifice his daughter. That gives some context to it. The same thing with the butterfly fairy apostle. When you look at her backstory, it in no way justifies their behavior, but it's understandable. You get some context for it. You can see that they come across, ironically enough, despite being demons, as being more kind of human, and there being a reason for being the way that they are. So let's get into the plot. So the show starts off with Guts, who is a lone mercenary. Now, Guts probably has the worst life of arguably any character in any anime ever. His life is absolutely horrendous. So he was born after his mother died and was hanging from a tree, hence the name Guts, because he was born amidst a bunch of guts. So he was yeah, he was adopted by the lover of a mercenary named Gambino. She dies fairly shortly after. Gambino hates him and abuses him throughout his childhood. Gambino sells him to Donovan, who rapes him. And despite that, Guts just kind of sticks around and gets constantly abused by him. He even gets the permanent scar on his nose. Eventually, a drunk Gambino just yells at him, and Guts winds up killing him and runs off on his own. So, from the very beginning, Guts is a child soldier. He was abused, he was raped. For the rest of the series, Guts really hates being touched by anyone because he just can't handle it because it brings back memories of rape. So, whenever we're looking at like Guts seems to be a psychopath, or he's just a mass murderer, or he just kills people without thinking, you have to put it into the context of how messed up this guy is. I do think that Guts is fundamentally a good person. He just has so many layers of PTSD and messed up stuff that happens to him. Anytime he starts to try to like unravel it and go back to being somewhat normal, something else insane happens. So he becomes a mercenary. I maintain, and I don't think it's been really established in the manga as far as I can determine, if Guts, there is anything supernatural about him to begin with. There is a theory I saw that Zod the Immortal is his father, which, I mean, there's no real evidence for it or against it as far as I can determine. I don't think Guts is a normal human. Because even when we first see him, he displays superhuman strength and superhuman endurance, and he can deal with wounds in a way that no other human character really can. So I do think that there is something supernatural about Guts, and when we see him, he defeats a really difficult opponent, and he is regarded as being an extremely powerful mercenary. Now, he gets robbed by a couple bandits from the mercenary group, the Band of the Hawk. He kills them, and he's basically just kind of blowing through everybody when Casca and Griffith show up. And Griffith sees something in Guts as having, I'm not sure exactly what it is. I think he sees Guts as having an immense amount of potential and someone who can be the greatest of his servants and the guy who can really pull his dream together and get him to where he needs to go. So Guts and Griffith have a fight. I think it's really interesting at this, comparing this level of the when they meet to what happens later. So at this point, Guts is completely out of control. He's emotional. He doesn't value anything. He's just kind of completely messed up. He has none of his shit together. And Griffiths is this calm, collected guy who is 100% in control of himself, who's resolved his internal issues, at least it appears so. And he's Guts' superior in every single way. And a core theme of this show, I feel, is Guts becoming a better person and Guts becoming a more well-rounded person, whereas Griffith gradually decays over time. So Griffith beats Guts in a fight, and as a result, Guts joins the Band of the Hawk, eventually becoming the commander of the Hawk's Raiders, which is like their shock trooper corps. So as we go through the Golden Age arc, and I find it funny that it's the Golden Age, like Berserk is such a depressing, grimdark series that the war where like tens of thousands of people die and villages get destroyed is the happiest time in everybody's lives. Like this is the Golden Age. It's the 100-year long like genocidal war where the countryside is stripped bare of resources to feed these massive armies. That's the happiest time in everybody's lives. That's the nicest the world's ever going to get. And by conviction arc, it just gets somehow exponentially worse, which is just kind of a testament to Berserk being Berserk. So Griffith very early on is introduced as being this extremely charismatic figure. Unlike a lot of other mercenary groups, there's a very strong ideological and spiritual component to how it is structured. The people who follow Griffith don't primarily follow him for money. They follow him because they believe in him personally. They see him as a sort of messianic figure who is giving them a purpose in their life. They were all just people who were swinging swords or came from desperate backgrounds, and he gave them a purpose. And they value that a lot more than the money that comes with it. And it provides them with a sense of discipline that is lacking in a normal mercenary group, and a sense of camaraderie and kind of familial affection between them. Griffith states that his dream is to become a king, although some of the language he gives in the anime implies that he believes he's destined to become king of the world. He has a crimson bailet, which is this weird charm that kind of looks like a face, and he says a fortune teller gave him it and told him that it was his destiny to rule the world. And this is kind of an ongoing theme in Berserk where it's very ambiguous how much things are individuals' choices, how much things are dictated by destiny and causality, and how much are things. I like the concept of something being overdetermined, wherein it's determined by multiple factors independently, and if one of them is not necessarily enough, the combination of them combines it. So does Griffith become a megalomaniac because that's just the way he is? Is it because the witch gave him the bail hut? Is it because his rise to power was dictated by the God Hand? Is this all what led him to be the way he was? Is this the stuff that led up to the choices that he would later make? Or was it entirely just him? Like, it's very much up in the air with Berserk. How much is people's individual choices? Like, when it comes to apostles, they ultimately have the choice to sacrifice to become an apostle to the God Hand. But if you look at the situations they're placed in, they're such horrific situations that are so impossible that it is hard to say they really have a choice in those situations most of the time, which is very much what happens with Griffith later. I think it's important to keep in mind that Griffith never says that his kingdom is going to be some utopia. He never says it's going to be a just place where every man has a fair shake, where the peasants are treated well. If it's going to be like outer heaven, where it's a mercenary kingdom where soldiers will never be used for political purposes or whatever. He just says, I want to be a king, I want power. And I think the whole kind of messianic quality of it is something that the Band of the Hawk and you, the reader, or sorry, you, the viewer, kind of reads into it. You see Griffith as this messianic figure. You see him as this kind, good man who elevates himself in a world full of dirt and grime and people who are selfish, and he serves some sort of higher purpose. But a lot of this is just projection, both from you, the viewer, and from people who surround Griffith, who believe in him. And the real Griffith is something that I feel like even now in the manga, after everything that's happened, we don't really know who or what the real Griffith is. Because Griffith can either just be a complete and total sociopath and everything he says is total bullshit, or he could be like, so a comparison I like to make is between Morgoth and Sauron. Morgoth, I think, was just like the Joker. He just wanted the world to burn. He knew that he would eventually lose, but he just wanted to create as much misery and suffering as possible. Whereas Sauron, I think, even by the time of Lord of the Rings, still tried to justify things to himself. That, okay, all these people are dying, all this horrific stuff is happening, but when I become king of the world, when I conquer Middle Earth, all the trains will run on time. I'll teach everyone technology. I will rule a world of perfect order. and I will make up for all the stuff that I did. And even if it's hollow even to himself, I do think at a certain level Sauron had to justify that. So is Griffith entirely just a sociopath without that? Or does he legitimately, on some level, say that he's going to be the Messiah, he's going to create a utopia on Earth, even if it's just bullshit to him as well? And that ultimately it's an extreme case of the ends justify the means. Because I think the rest of the God Hand is just pure evil. They have no conception of a greater good. I feel like Griffith might still justify his actions to himself in some fashion like that. Griffith is definitely an interesting character because we never really know for sure, does he value the people around him as people, or does he just value the people around him as tools? Does he actually consider Guts to be his friend? Is he actually torn up when Guts leaves him, or is it because it is a erosion of his control and he needs control over any circumstances? Griffith is very much shown to do anything necessary to obtain his goals. He winds up letting a dude rape him in exchange for a bunch of money and supplies to get the mercenary company going faster. And there's kind of the question, did he do it because he doesn't want to see his men die, or did he do it because it was expedient and he's willing to do anything for power? I don't know. So most of the Golden Age arc is kind of military fiction. You have Griffith, Guts, and Casca, who we'll get to in a second, fighting on behalf of the Kingdom of Midland, which takes place in the country of Europe. Midland, I think, is supposed to roughly be like England, and Tudor is, I think, supposed to be France. They're in 100 Years' War that's basically gone nowhere, and Griffith emerges as the first figure who's able to really make progress in it on the Midland side, and he gets victory after victory and success after success. And he gradually becomes a noble. The Band of the Hawk becomes part of the Midland Army. They eventually get elevated to knights. It's kind of the main underlying plot throughout the season. The other main character we have, the third main character, is Casca. Now, I find it interesting. So, Casca is dark skinned. No one ever refers to her as being foreign, and this takes place in the country of Europe. My guess is that she's some sort of gypsy, or she's something like that, because it's not really ever explained. Apparently, it was just Miura likes brown warrior women or something. Was literally the explanation for her being created. But she was a girl who was from a poor village who was sold to a nobleman, apparently as a maid. But he tries to rape her because this is Berserk and everyone tries to rape everyone. Griffith saved her and gave her a purpose, and she swore a lifetime of devotion to him, and she learned to use a sword. So she is an incredibly effective warrior, a great commander, and is beloved by the men. I think Casca is a really interesting character because it was kind of before she was created before kind of the current wave of feminism or the current wave of I don't like using the term but wokeness, wherein she's an extremely strong female character, but she's not unfeminine in that she does have a very strong motherly, big sisterly quality to her. And her men refer to her as being big sis Casca. And she does tend to be kind of a bit like a mother hen to her troops. And she does have a certain feminine grace and elegance to her, even when she's fighting on the battlefield. So it's I think she feels a lot of frustration over being a woman, but this is before like everything had to be about trans stuff. So I think Casca's a very good female character because it's part of her, but it's her whole thing isn't just mud discrimination. I actually was born a man and I'm trapped in a woman's body and stuff like that. She really is kind of struggling to find her identity. Part of the issue is that she's in love with Griffith, but it can never be because Griffith is only interested in power. And however he feels about Casca, Griffith's sexuality is another open ended question. Is Griffith bi? Is Griffith heterosexual? Is he gay? Is he his own thing? Is he just Griffith? That's what I tend to go in. Is he's just Griffith? He's his own thing. No one can really figure it out. But Casca is a pretty radical tsundere towards Guts. She constantly like berates him and yells at him and says he's reckless and says he's uncaring and says you're impacting Griffith's dream. And to be honest, it's a little hard to watch in some scenes. Like she's really rough to Guts. To be fair, Guts is not a pussy and he like pushes back against her a lot of the time. And he like will give his not quite as hard as he gets, but he will push back against her. And over time, Guts and Casca save each other's asses a bunch of times, and they really start to get closer and get an understanding of each other. And one of the things that, once again, like I said, Guts becomes a better person over the course of the Golden Age arc, where Griffith becomes a worse person. I think the other thing is that Guts is just very genuine. He doesn't necessarily know what he is at the moment, and he's still kind of developing as a character. But he is the ugly truth. He's very rough. He's really down to earth. But what you see is what you get. He's not a deceitful person. He's not going to lie and flatter you and stuff like that. Like when he says that Casca looks beautiful in the dress, he means that. He's not the kind of person who would just say that if he didn't mean it. Whereas Griffith is silver tongued and will lie and cheat and steal and do whatever it takes for power. And I think to a certain extent, Casca grows to respect that in Guts, that he is an authentic person. Also realizing that she can never be with Griffith, but she could maybe be with Guts, and they could be really good as a couple. And I think it's sad because I actually think they would have been good parents. I think together they probably could have gotten past their traumas and had a bunch of kids and raised them with love and been able to find some measure of peace. This is Berserk, though, and no one finds any measure of peace no matter what happens. It's just one disaster after another. So, anyways, the series goes along. Griffith gradually gains power. I think one of the funniest aspects of this, of the whole Griffith rise to power arc, is there's multiple conspiracies to try to stop him. And at the time, we're sympathizing with Griffith, so there's like these nobles, and they're like, we can't allow a commoner to become a count. We can't allow this dude to maybe marry the princess, this upjacked mercenary. He's crude, he's bad. And you're on Griffith's side, so you're like, oh, these guys are assholes. These guys are prissy. They don't appreciate Griffith because they're entitled. And like you got this evil conspiracy, and then it turns out that the evil conspiracy was 100% right. And 100% Griffith was a climber, was a sociopath, was somebody that they had to stop. Even if they were trying to stop him for the real reasons, it's funny because they're portrayed as being this really petty evil force, but they were 100% right the entire time. So, like I said, Gus becomes a better person. He comes to care for his men, for his boys. He gains some sense of empathy, some ability to kind of emotionally connect with other people. The Band of the Hawk become kind of his first real friends. Griffith gives some like weird pretentious speech about how for a man to be his friend, he has to have his own dream and he has to stand on his own 2 feet. And Griffith is a very enigmatic figure, and I'm going to be honest, I don't entirely understand him. I don't know if anybody really understands Griffith. And maybe that's kind of the point, is that he is an antichrist devil figure, and so we don't really know how much of him is a lie, how much of him is the truth. Is there even anything under Griffith? Is he just completely an empty suit of armor? It's an interesting question. But the Band of the Hawk keeps fighting, and they succeed in beating Tudor, retaking the territory that had been lost at the start of the Hundred Years' War. The war ends in a decisive victory for Midland. Griffith has made a count. The commanders of the Band of the Hawk are risen to the peerage. The Hawks themselves become a knightly order. Everything looks like it's moving in Griffith's direction. He sends Guts to try to kill some of his enemies. Now, I don't know if Griffith intended for Guts to kill Adonis, who is the son of the king's brother, and kind of the heir presumptive to the throne. It's kind of confusing how the succession system works. The King of Midland only has a daughter, so the idea is that they would marry her to her cousin, and then there would be no doubt as to who the ruler would be, their son would be 100% the legitimate heir, and there would be no succession crisis. So the brother of the king is plotting against Guts. He's plotting against Griffith. So Griffith sends Guts to kill him. While he's there, though, he winds up also killing the kid, and this profoundly affects Guts. Guts doesn't like killing kids, and he doesn't like seeing kids get hurt. Probably because it was the way that reminds him of the way that he was raised. The guy's father is very abusive to the kid he kills, and it gives him a lot of flashbacks to his childhood. And Griffith just doesn't give a shit. I think one of the things is Griffith got Guts to do it by telling him, "Oh, you're my friend, Guts. I need you to do this for me." And then he comes back, and Griffith is giving the speech about how, like, none of the people under him are his friends. They're all just pawns. They're just people he uses to try to achieve my dream. So Guts eventually decides that he needs to leave. Now, why he leaves, there's a couple different interpretations, and they aren't mutually exclusive. One is that he wants to try to find himself and develop an identity outside of just being Griffith's number two. One is that he feels that he takes what Griffith says seriously and wants to be his friend. And as part of that, he has to become a whole person and get his own dream and stuff like that. There's also the fact that he realizes he has feelings for Casca, and he doesn't want to get in the way of her being with Griffith. As people repeatedly point out to him, this is a dumb thing to say because Griffith wants power, and the only person he can marry who will give him power is the princess. That's why I said I think it could be that his goal all along was for Guts to also kill the kid. So the only heir to the throne is Charlotte, and Griffith has been working on seducing her, so maybe he can find some way to manipulate the king into letting him marry her. Now, whether the king would ever let a commoner, even one who's been ennobled and is a war hero, marry his daughter is an open question, but it definitely looks to you, the audience, like it's heading in that direction, that Griffith is going to become the king of Midland, that he will accomplish his dream, and everything he said and did was effective ultimately. Now, as a side note, as we go through this show, we gradually begin to see some dark fantasy elements. They come across Zod the Immortal, who is known as the eternal mercenary, the god of battle, who's thought to have lived for hundreds of years and killed thousands of men. Guts and Griffith wind up fighting him. He transforms into a giant minotaur that is in no way the inspiration for the Taurus demon. And he beats the shit out of Guts and Griffith, and they only survive because he sees the crimson ballet around Griffith's neck and leaves. Now, Zod, I don't have a ton of time to talk about, but I find him a very interesting character because while he's a villain, there is some sympathetic aspects to him, and there is a sense of, even if it's kind of twisted and corrupted, almost kind of knightly honor to him, where ultimately what he wants is like a good fight. That's the thing they used to say in EVE Online, is he wants to fight worthy opponents. He's not particularly sadistic. He doesn't care about killing random people. He doesn't care about eating humans. All he really wants is just to fight worthy opponents. And while he does kill a lot of people, the people he kills aren't like innocent bystanders. They're other soldiers. There's people who have weapons and can defend themselves. Now, can they defend themselves against a apostle who's as strong as Zod? No. But as far as apostles go, he's definitely one of the less evil and more complex. I find that whenever the God Hand needs something done, and needs something done properly, they send Zod because he's the only reliable person they have. And the rest of them are just so crazy and like unreliable that they can't send them because they'll just fuck it up. So they fight Zod. Ultimately, like I said, Guts leaves. Griffith decides to fight him. They have like so Griffith has like a saber and Guts has a his giant two-handed greatsword. So they swing at each other. Griffith thinks he's going to be able to parry this like greatsword from this dude who's like a foot taller than him. Or I don't know if Guts is a foot taller than him. But Guts is like a Giga Chad. Guts is like the biggest Chad. He probably has the highest T levels of any character in anime. And they swing at each other, and Guts just cuts his sword in half and then walks away. So Griffith goes into full on meltdown mode. Um, this is why a lot of people think that he might be a homosexual or bi or whatever, and he had some kind of, regardless of whether he had a sexual attraction to Guts or not, he had some kind of weird obsession with him. Whether he considered Guts a friend or his greatest pawn, or he saw it as him losing control and he couldn't deal with that, we don't really know. But Griffith decides to go to Princess Charlotte, and she's going to be his rebound. She's going to be his rebound from Guts. Guts left him, so he's going to go screw the princess. Now, I like Charlotte. Charlotte's a nice girl. Charlotte's a QT. I think some people shit on her. I like her. I think Charlotte did nothing wrong. She's like a normal, decent person in the world of Berserk, and that might make her look like really weak and really pathetic. But 99% of people couldn't survive in the world of Berserk. And it's nice to see someone who has kind of a normal moral compass. So Griffith goes to sleep with her. Now, depending on the adaptation, it's a question as to whether or not you consider this rape. Because she does initially say no to Griffith, or we can't do this, and Griffith kind of does a no means yes thing, and then she kind of just goes along with it. Now, Charlotte does enjoy it because she's in love with Griffith, but it's a question whether or not like it's really consensual, because he does kind of force himself on her to a limited extent. I think it's an open question. I think we can say regardless, it's really fucked. Griffith obviously doesn't enjoy the sex at all. He spends the whole time just thinking about Guts, and it looks like he feels dirty afterwards. Now, this whole thing was completely retarded. The king finds out about it. They capture Griffith. The Band of the Hawk are deemed traitors and are hunted down and killed. And Griffith is put into a torture cell, and he is tortured nonstop for a year. And we get lots of fucked up stuff because this is Berserk. They cut all the tendons in his body so he can barely move. They cut out his tongue. They probably cut off his dick. Griffith is basically just crippled and scarred for the rest of his life. Now, Guts eventually comes back from his exile. It turns out that there's about a quarter or so of the Band of the Hawk left that hasn't been killed or deserted, being led by Casca, who's on the verge of a total breakdown. Guts comes back and manages to just wipe out like 100 dudes who were about to take them out. I'm skipping a lot of Casca and Guts' relationship because this video is going to be super long regardless, and I can't cover everything. If people want more Berserk videos, post in the chat and let me post in the comment section and let me know. Casca more or less gives into despair and tries to kill herself again. Eventually, Guts and her just kind of acknowledge that they have feelings for each other and they make love. And it is a very sweet scene. And Guts and Casca are a very lovable couple, and you just think maybe stuff is looking up for Guts. He's come back. He's got his QT tomboy waifu. Like everybody respects him. He's become a leader. He's proven that he's his own person without Griffith. He's gonna come in like Batman. He's gonna save Griffith. He's gonna be Griffith's BFF, and everything's gonna work itself out. It's gonna be a happy ending in Berserk. Unfortunately, this is Berserk, so they manage to go in, save Griffith. They find that he is utterly destroyed and tortured, and he will never be able to wield a sword again or command the Band of the Hawk. Basically, Guts more or less becomes the leader, and they try to press him into that role. And while this is all happening, we get to the eclipse. Griffith briefly tries to... it's kind of funny because he tries to rape Casca. I know I'm saying it's funny because I call it the rebound from the rebound, because like Charlotte was the rebound from Guts and Casca is the rebound from the rebound. And he's like, okay, so my life is complete shit. I can have this like brown waifu take care of me for the rest of my life. She can be like my mommy GF. She can just take care of me, and that'll be something at least. And then he's like, oh no, she's in love with Guts and she's with Guts, and I'm just completely alone. And so we get to this situation. Griffith has lost everything. He'll never be able to command again. He can't even communicate anymore. He can't wield a sword. His looks have been ruined. He doesn't probably doesn't have a dick anymore. And he's sitting in this in water, and he just starts to lose it. And his Baalid activates, and we have the eclipse. And the members of the God Hand show up, and they tell Griffith that this is his destiny. He's being given the option to join the God Hand, to become a god, to become the fifth member of it, and to become the messianic divine figure that he always believed that he was entitled to be. And we get a really cool, interesting, like I said, I kind of feel like they shouldn't have had the beginning episode, so this came as more of a surprise in this, because this is a very shocking, just because it goes from having like being a normal medieval anime with some dark fantasy elements to being full on like over the top. They go to hell, everything goes completely crazy, there's hundreds of demons and stuff like that. And we have a kind of a cool series of events where the God Hand basically just explains to Griffith, like, look, you tried to justify all this stuff to yourself, but you never cared about the people under you. They were always tools. And besides that, they all willingly sacrificed themselves for your dream. It's not your fault that they made the decision of their own free will to follow you, to die for you, to be your servants. And you shouldn't feel bad about that, because that was their decision and it made them happy to have a purpose. And they say to him, look, to become one of us, you have to sacrifice what's left of the Band of the Hawk. But you've sacrificed so much already. It's a sunk cost fallacy. The piles of bodies that you have made in your path will mean nothing. That'll all go away. If you continue, if you sacrifice what's left of the Band of the Hawk, people who are willing and are happy to sacrifice themselves for you, then you can become a god, and then you can make everything right. And you can achieve your dream, and you can rule the world. The alternative is you go back to the way things are, where you're just a cripple who will never achieve anything and will probably die a slow and painful death from infection or just an inability to move properly. So Griffith ultimately decides to accept it and be reincarnated as Femto, one of the four God Hand. Sorry, the fifth member of the God Hand. Demons show up and eat everybody, all the members of the Band of the Hawk, except for Guts and Casca. Griffith decides he wants to fuck with Guts, so he violently rapes Casca. And once again, you could almost view this in a really fucked up, twisted way as him fulfilling the wishes, because like a core theme of Berserk is that evil is I don't really want to get into the idea of evil here, but that people's wishes are being fulfilled in really messed up ways. And Casca's always loved Griffith. She's always wanted to have sex with Griffith. So he's like, I'm going to give you your wish now, because I'm a god, and that's what I do. And so the show ends with Guts having cut off his arm, one of his eyes gets gouged out, and he's watching his waifu get raped by his best friend in hell. And it just stops. There's no ending, there's no conclusion, it just ends. It just stops. It stops on that scene, and that's the end of the show, and that's why it pissed off a lot of people, because there's no conclusion. There's like an after credit scene that cuts back to the Black Swordsman arc. We have no idea how Guts got out of there. The Skull Knight, I don't think, is introduced. It is a big fuck you. And if you look at like the worst anime endings, if you look at the biggest anime betrayals, this one pretty much always gets number one on the list. And like I said, for good reason. And once again, it's would this have been better if they had included the Skull Knight, if they maybe have had the Skull Knight show up and save them like they did in the new one? It would have made this less self-contained, but it would have set it up better. And they never made a season 2 for this. And I don't know if there was enough material at the time to do a season 2. I don't know if the Conviction arc was finished at this point in time, because they would later come back and do that. And so what we're left with is a masterpiece of dark fantasy with some of the best artwork, and there's a lot of parts in it where they just use still frames almost from the manga, and I actually prefer that. I don't like CG. I much prefer the art style in this to the art style of the new one. I actually think like the characters look a lot more attractive and they look a lot better. And it's just a better overall. Something I really appreciate about this series, kind of actually reviewing it, is the music is very 90s. It's hard to describe, but it's like Berserk really fits the 90s because the 90s was all about everything just being over the top and hardcore and rock music and stuff like that, and like kung fu fighting and cheese and stuff like that. I think like that's probably the thing that's the funniest about this is the opening song "Tell Me Why" is like this kind of happy 90s grunge sounding thing sung in English, and it's completely and utterly inappropriate. And I know every time I watch this show and like I hear that, I just start singing along with it, like tell me right, tell me what you want. It's too late, um, and stuff like that. So it's a fun theme song. The music's fun. Everything about this show is just awesome. But once again, you have to have a pretty high tolerance for blood, gore, rape, and all kinds of other horrific shit. But definitely one of the all-time greats. Sorry this video is so long. If you want me to do more stuff about Berserk, let me know. But it is truly one of the greats. God bless everybody, and I'll talk to you again real soon.